Now, because the feast days overlap the judgments, the wedding, the birth, the harvest cycles, from Passover all the way down to Tabernacles and ultimately Hanukkah, what we have here is a timeline that's going to begin at Hanukkah and end at Hanukkah, just like the full circle I showed you with the wedding and the baby. Okay, so you have these two halves of the timeline from Passover to Hanukkah, and ultimately Passover to Hanukkah that are going to overlap each other. When you study the book of Daniel, you're going to see that he gave us some numbers to look at. He gave us 2,300 days. He gave us 1260. He gave us 1290. And he gave us 1335. Okay? The 2,300 days that Daniel gave us comes from the fact that you have a timeline going from Passover to Hanukkah, and it overlaps each other. It overlaps right here by 200 and some odd days. If we take a 7-year timeline, which is 520 days or something like that, and we subtract this overlap, we're going to end up with the 2,300 days. I'm not sure the exact numbers. I'm not trying to be too technical. The purpose of this video here is to teach the basic concept of where we're getting this timeline from. Okay? Now, why do I say Hanukkah? If everything ends at Tabernacles, which would be right about here, trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles, why are we adding Hanukkah to this timeline right here? What does Hanukkah have to do with tabernacles? Let me show you. So let's figure out why Hanukkah has anything to do with this timeline. If you go back to Passover, when Jesus resurrected, there was the day of Passover. You have 7 days of unleavened bread. And then in the middle of unleavened bread, you have first fruits. Okay? This is when Jesus resurrected. He walked the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and then he ascended. This is a parallel to Moses, who brought the people out of Egypt. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and then crossed over to their promised land. It's also a parallel to Noah. Noah got on the ark at Passover. It began to rain. It rained 40 days and 40 nights. And this is a parallel to Jesus ascending into heaven after 40 days. Okay? Then the earth was filled with water for an extra 110 days, which brings you around to the time of trumpets. The 120-day mark is tabernacles, remember? The 4 months between Pentecost and tabernacles. And then this brings you to the time where Jesus starts to descend back down onto the earth, where the floodwaters are starting to recede. There's your early rain and your latter rain, 40 days on both sides. So there's another 40-day wait before Noah can get off of the ark. Now, let me show you this calendar-wise. So I told you there was a resurrection associated with Passover, but no resurrection associated with Pentecost, and a resurrection associated with tabernacles. These are the 3 feasts where the men were required to show up in Jerusalem. However, I told you that Pentecost ran all summer long and ended at tabernacles. So what you can say is that the resurrection for tabernacles is also for Pentecost as well. We have another 40-day wait, like I showed you in the parallel with the days of Noah. And then the ascension. Okay? So what you end up with is a mirror image of the resurrection of Jesus. And you say, well, what does this have to do with Hanukkah? I'm going to show you. Because this ascension right here ends up being on a Hanukkah, but it's not the one you might think. If you study the chapters in the book of Daniel that I mentioned in the first part of this series, you're going to see a bunch of numbers listed that I mentioned a while ago. The 2,300 days, the 1260, 1290, 1335. What Daniel is referencing here is the fact that God has his calendar, but the Jews have messed it up. They have their own calendar system now, and it's not in sync with God's. In fact, he tells us they're about a month off from God's calendar. And what happens is God said he would turn their feast days into mourning on their calendar, but at the same time fulfill his own feast days on his own calendar. So how does that happen? Hanukkah is the one feast day that takes prophecy full circle from beginning to end. You start at Hanukkah and go back around to Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the one feast day that ties all of the other feast days together. Let me show you. You can take the menorah and you can lay God's holy feast days on the menorah lamp itself. The Pentecost, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, trumpets, atonement, and tabernacles. Hanukkah begins it and Hanukkah ends it. Jesus said, I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning of the end. So if Hanukkah is the beginning and the end of the feast days, then Hanukkah will take you full circle through the cross. Okay. God said he was going to take the Jewish feast days and turn their days into mourning, while also fulfilling his feast days, the correct ones on his calendar. How's this going to happen? Well, Daniel told us how it would happen with the 1260, 1290, 1335 day counts, okay? In other words, if you take the resurrection of Jesus and you go down that 40 days and you come to his ascension, you come over here to Tabernacles and just pretend these are months. Month 1, 2, 3, all the way to 7, 8, 9, okay? God's Hanukkah on his calendar is all the way over here. But 40 days doesn't go that far from Tabernacles. It only goes to right here. Well, since the Jewish calendar is off by 30 days from God's calendar, the ascension will land here, not on God's Hanukkah, but on the Jewish Hanukkah. Okay? So we have the Jewish Hanukkah from God's tabernacles. So this is God's calendar tabernacles all the way down to the Jewish Hanukkah. Okay? So he's fulfilling Hanukkah, but he's using their calendar to do it. So what you have is that mirror image of the resurrection, the 40 days, and then the ascension. Okay? When Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter said to him, "Shall I build tabernacles?" And Jesus said, No, you don't understand. He said, yes, the transfiguration will take place here, but the actual ascension itself would be at Hanukkah. Now, why is God bringing Hanukkah into the feast days as far as the Jewish wedding is concerned? Well, it's because of this right here, the 4, 2, and 1. When Jesus came the first time, he fulfilled the first 4 feast days: Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and Pentecost. When he comes back, he's only going to fulfill trumpets and atonement. After the millennial reign, when we are eternally with God, then tabernacles will be fulfilled. That's the point of tabernacles, is being with God forever. So what we have to have back here for tabernacles is what we call a pseudo tabernacles, or a dress rehearsal type thing. A lesser fulfillment of the greater feast. Kind of like Moses when he went on the mountain. It was a lesser fulfillment of Pentecost, but when the day of Pentecost fully came, the Holy Spirit came down and gave us all these gifts. Well, it's the same thing with tabernacles. The real tabernacles won't be fulfilled until after the millennial reign. But here we are right here. So because tabernacles represents the wedding feast of the Lamb and the 7-day celebration of the wedding, we have to have a 7-day substitute right here. And because Hanukkah is a 7-day substitute, because Hanukkah is 7 days, it becomes our substitute for tabernacles. So when we have the resurrection at the real tabernacles, we go 40 days down to Hanukkah, like I showed you, and we ascend into heaven after those 40 days. Okay? And because he's using the Jewish calendar to turn their feast days into mourning, it will happen on their Hanukkah, so they will get the message and figure out what's going on. But at the same time, he will show up at his real tabernacles. In order to look at the judgments in the book of Revelation and how they correspond to this timeline, you got to start thinking about Satan. The judgments are related to Satan's doings, Satan's shenanigans, okay? What you have are God's 7 feast days here. You have 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 thunders, and 7 vials. We have no earthly clue what these are. We weren't told. We will be told when the 2 witnesses show up. That's one of the things that's going to prove they're the 2 witnesses. They're going to reveal these. Okay? Now, if we go look at the 7 seals, okay, how do we know it's related to Passover? Well, it's talking about the white horse. That's Satan. Satan comes on a white horse pretending to be the Messiah, just, telling everybody he's the king. Okay? Passover, instead of the Messiah coming, you got Satan coming, or the Antichrist, I should say. Unleavened bread has to do with Jesus dying to make peace, but instead we get war on the earth. First fruits is all about harvest, but the black horse represents famine. Pentecost is all about growth and life, but instead death is coming. Trumpets is all about the resurrection, but instead you get martyrs. Atonement is all about forgiveness, but instead you get cosmic disturbances, anger. Tabernacles is all about dwelling with Jesus forever, but instead they get his wrath and separation from him. So we know based on the patterns, and I won't go through the rest of these, we know based on the patterns that these seals are being opened one on each feast day, okay? But we do have a problem here, because the Bible tells us that the elders were seated in heaven with Jesus when he opened the seals. So that means that the first rapture or first gathering has already taken place before these seals can start.